Welcome to episode 100 of the Reframe and Reset Your Career podcast. We have a special guest today, my good friend Dorie Clark, who also appeared on episode 5. Dorie's work is very much aligned with the message of the podcast of empowering yourself, doing good work, and being strategic about your career development. Thank you to the listeners for your continued support and helping us reach this milestone. Feel free to contact me with your thoughts on what you like and how we could improve. Please subscribe or leave a review. It makes such a difference. In this episode, we may touch on mental health and wellness topics purely in general terms. If you have specific issues or concerns, please contact a suitable professional. Now back to the show. Dorie has been named 3 times as one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50 and was recognized as the #1 communication coach in the world by the Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Awards. Dorie is a consultant and keynote speaker, teaches executive education at Columbia Business School, and she's a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of The Long Game, Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out, which was named the #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. A former presidential campaign spokeswoman, Clark has been named by the New York Times as an expert at self-reinvention and helping others make changes in their lives. She is also the writer of a musical, Absolute Zero, and has a cat named Philip. Welcome, Dorie. I forgot to ask you, Dorie, do you have any other cats, or am I missing out any of your pets?
Thank you, Harsha. I appreciate it because you are missing out. Philip is the more social brother, but we do have Heath as well.
Oh, cool. Okay. And Heath, that's not named after Heath Ledger, is it?
He's not. He was part of a litter of cats that the shelter named, and they called them the Candy Cats because he was named after the Heath bar, candy bar.
Okay, I don't think we had that over here in Europe, but hey, always good to get more knowledge. So, Dorie, I'm a big fan of the arts. Is there a performer, song, book, or film which you'd like to share with us? And this is not a test of coolness.
Yeah, thank you, Harsha. I appreciate it because I would probably fail the test of coolness. But what I have been really, going down the rabbit hole of lately is Fleetwood Mac. And of course, Fleetwood Mac isn't, not unknown, but I would say proudly that I perhaps at this point know more about Fleetwood Mac than many, many other people. I've read probably about 8 books about Fleetwood Mac and its various members, biographies, memoirs, different historical documents. And so I feel like I have a fairly 360-degree view of the group and their dynamics, which is really fascinating. So if people are looking for a project, coming to understand the management and creativity dynamics and interpersonal relationships in Fleetwood Mac is a pretty fun starting place, honestly.
Oh, I just love that, Dorie, because I like Fleetwood Mac. They are not cool. There's so many interesting tales about breakups, makeups, people sleeping with different people in the band. So yeah, it's a great tale. I don't know if you're a Talking Heads fan, Dorie. Do you like their music?
Yeah, certainly I'm familiar with them. It's also interesting in terms of theater because, of course, David Byrne has done a lot of kind of Broadway projects lately. My knowledge doesn't go too much beyond Psycho Killer and a few of the hits. Maybe that's the next rabbit hole. I don't know. Why do you ask, Harsha?
No, because there's a great book by the drummer, Chris Frantz. I can't remember the exact name, but I've been reading it a lot. And it's obviously detailing the story of the band. And the interesting thing there is that he's married to the bassist, and they've been married for over 40 years, Tina Weymouth. So it's such an interesting story how, one, you can produce these amazing songs, but 2, how 50% of the band are married to each other. And they're still married to each other, which I find amazing.
It's definitely a better record than Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I just love the way he plays drums, she's on the bass. So they essentially provide the rhythm section to the band. So yeah.
That's so symbiotic. It's true. And in fact, to that point, probably the healthiest long-term relationship in Fleetwood Mac has actually been the platonic relationship of John McVie and Mick Fleetwood, the drummer-bass combinations. Yeah. So that is cool. The other thing that I'll suggest, which is newer, is I'm reading right this minute, a little US-UK crossover, the new memoir by Keith McNally, the restaurateur, called I Regret Almost Everything. And it's really interesting and well written. He's a very smart and thoughtful guy. So that book has been really fun and is kind of an interesting portrait both of the hip New York restaurant scene of the 80s and 90s and beyond, and then also his post-war upbringing in working class England.
Yeah, cool. Oh, and one other thing, Dorie, I've got to give you a shout out for recommending Blake Crouch because I'd never come across him. And then I've written his, I think, 3 novels, the one with the time travel, the one where they're looking at lost memories, and then the one after that. A great book. Yeah.
Amazing,
great recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah. Love
Blake
it.
Crouch is awesome.
Cool. So, Dorie, before we dive in, as I was speaking to you off air, I think one thing that's really important for our careers and for our lives is the whole idea of mindset and really understanding yourself and really trying to figure out almost what is it that you really want to get out of your career and your life. Because if they're not aligned, it could be that you're making a lot of money, but actually money is not the thing that is really going to give a great deal of meaning and addition to your life.
Yeah, you're certainly right. I mean, there's a million stories out there. I mean, we know people personally. We hear stories about people who just in the end find that they are chasing or have chased the wrong thing. And obviously that's a fairly demoralizing realization once you hit a certain point that that's time that you can't get back. And so the most classic, of course, is the person who is starting out by optimizing for money. You need enough of it, obviously, but it's one of those things that can quickly spiral and become the be all and end all. And I think, you know, anyone who's read any art or literature knows that that's usually a bad position to be in. So I think periodically asking the question, I mean, you know, meaning and purpose is very loaded and it can feel very overwhelming. You know, what is my purpose on earth? Well, you know, obviously people have been trying to figure that out for millennia. But what I recommend in my book, The Long Game, is what I call a strategy of optimizing for interesting, which is, you know, at a minimum, you might not know what your purpose is in life, but most people can at least tell you what they find interesting. Whatever. Golf, not interesting. Theater, interesting, or vice versa. You know, whatever it is, you kind of have a sense. And so the goal is just like go toward more of what's interesting for you, and you will probably end up in a good place. That lowers the bar and I think takes a lot of the pressure off. But yeah, nobody wants to be the sucker that spends their life the wrong way. So let's try to avoid that.
Yeah, and I love that point because, say, take with this podcast, I really didn't think that I had any talent for it right at the beginning, but I thought it's an interesting thing to do. I was thinking maybe do a couple of episodes, see if there's a good reaction. Obviously, I've managed to get great guests like Dorie and Christian Bush and some others at the beginning, so you get a momentum. And then you find that you get interested in something and then you really want to pursue it. So I love those points that you're making about you may not know exactly what your purpose is, but look for what you find interesting, go after that. And there's almost this organic thing that comes out of it that you create one piece of content, then maybe you create a video, then you see these connections starting up. It's almost like Steve Jobs. You know, I love that story about how he did the calligraphy, but then the calligraphy ended up with Apple and he's looking for this aesthetic. And with Apple, it's about that look and the aesthetic. And when you're talking about your brand, which we'll go on to later, it's figuring out what is it that makes you unique. How can you connect? People connect with that. So I love those points that you're making.
Yeah, and I think you added something useful to the puzzle, Harsha, which is that I think early on people are sometimes looking for like some magic click. And you know, sometimes there is a magic click. I mean, sure, but more often it's a little bit more subtle, right? I mean, I have a feeling, I mean, I always find you charming, but I have a feeling that if you personally went back and listened to episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, you would probably be cringing at yourself saying, oh no, you know, I was so bad back then, because you have 100 episodes under your belt. Of course you're better. You've learned things, you would do things differently, but you had to start there. And I think sometimes, you know, where people go wrong is they're holding themselves to some ideal like, oh, when I find the right thing, I'm instantly going to be amazing at it. And that is not the metric we're looking for, because that almost never happens. You have to be interested enough in it, interested enough to want to learn, to want to keep at it, to want to get better. But inevitably, almost anyone is going to be a lot better on episode 100 than they are on episode, 4 or 5.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you make, Dorie. I think it's that consistency, because if you can say, okay, every week, every 2 weeks, even every month, I'm going to produce this piece of content, and you do it so many times, you are going to get better and you're going to achieve hopefully a level of mastery, and you're aspiring to get better. And I think you never want to be satisfied, but also you want to be able to go back, look at what you've done, analyze that. And it's this feedback loop where you're taking these points from before, trying to improve. And I think over time, the more you do anything, the better you'll become, won't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about Tim Ferriss, the podcaster, and he's talked about how he started out doing a podcast as an experiment. You know, I mean, his first episodes, I mean, he was like drinking wine with his friend and doing these drunk podcasts. Like, I mean, I guess that's an okay experiment, but like, I wouldn't call it a sustainable model. But at a certain point, once he realized that he liked it and he actually cared enough to invest in getting better, he talks about how he hired professionals. He actually hired current or former NPR journalists to listen to his episodes and to give him feedback and to, give him notes about, well, you could have asked this question here, or you could have paused longer here, and, precise bits of actionable advice so that he could improve as an interviewer. And, similarly, like you, I mean, he's even further along. He's been doing it for 10 years, but 10 years later, he's an incredibly sensitive, nuanced interviewer. And the minute you have a question in your head as the listener about like, well, wait, what do they mean by that? Here he is jumping in, well, wait, what do you mean by that? He's always nailing it because he cared enough and took it seriously enough to invest in deeper training to do it. So I think, the myth of the natural kind of hangs up a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think with your work, you're trying to almost demystify this idea that there's this linear path to success. I think we all have roadblocks or bumps in the road, and it's trying to say, look, just get going, just start, because if you don't start, you're not going to produce episode 1, and then you've got to have 1 before you can produce 5, 10, 15, 100. So just get going. But also that, I think the point you made about be self-aware and take criticism, take feedback, because if they're your friends, they'll hopefully give you stuff that is actionable and which you can work on and improve.
That's right. And the necessary corollary that I always like to add is take feedback from the people you ask for feedback. There's going to be plenty of people that want to give you feedback for whatever reason. And oftentimes they don't actually know what they're talking about. They might be commenting on random things, like, Harsha, this whole British accent thing, I'm not sure it's working for you. People will come up with anything, right? And so we just have to discern that when someone is a total rando, they have no right to give you feedback. And it is fine to not only reject it and not listen to it, but also to shove it down their throats a little bit. Like, why do you think it's appropriate to say this? Because it isn't. Like they need a brushback pitch.
It makes me think of that Friends episode where Ross tries on an English accent in his class. I don't know whether you remember that.
Amazingly, unlike everybody else in the world, I didn't watch Friends, so I don't know. But yes, that sounds good to me.
Very good. Anyway, so back to the job search and career development. Now, Dorie, it's obviously a very difficult job market out there. So if you've lost your job, how can you bounce back from that? And secondly, if you are in work, how can you try and make yourself as indispensable as possible to your boss?
Yeah. So these two questions, you're asking them together for a very pointed reason, which is that they do mesh pretty well. Whether you have a job or not, the key question these days really is, how do you make yourself indispensable? Either as a preventative measure so that ideally you don't get laid off, or as a reclamatory measure so that you can hopefully, climb back on the horse and get hired somewhere else. Especially in the era of AI, every decade we have sort of a different bugaboo that we need to solve for. And, let's call it in the mid 90s to the mid 2000s, it was, oh my God, there's the internet now. Then, it's, oh my God, there's globalization now, thanks to the internet. And, oh, there's automation. And now we have AI. It's all of those things on steroids. But the net result of them is the same, which is, wait a minute, there's going to be someone or something out there that will do the work faster and cheaper. And I think that what we have learned from that is that you can never compete with faster and cheaper. The dynamics change, right? First, it's like, okay, well, let's offshore to India. Then all of a sudden, India gets very expensive, comparatively. So it's like, okay, well, where can we offshore to now? It's sort of a moving target. Yeah. But the bottom line is there's always going to be someone or something that will do a commoditized task in a more efficient way than you as a bag of blood human. And so the question is, how do you make it worth someone's while to pay you more? And that's a really interesting question because we have to solve it for ourselves. There's not easy answers. It's not a plug and play. We have to figure it out for ourselves. And that's both, the exciting opportunity and the challenge, because it's very, very bespoke based on who you are and what you're interested in and what your skills are. So in a broad sense, it relates to you cultivating skills that are out of the norm, that either a machine can't do or that other people can't do, which, does get harder and harder. Although the more we're able to be kind of clever about either hyper specialization or conversely, a kind of interesting Venn diagram of this plus that in an unusual way, that makes you more valuable because that's a less replicable thing to do. That's a piece of it. Another piece of it is your brand, because when you have a strong brand, it becomes a kind of guarantee. And the metaphor is true, right? Like I can buy a can of peaches at the grocery store from the store brand, and it's going to be probably 30% less. But I always have that piece in my head saying, yeah, but did they cut corners? Yeah, but are they going to taste as good? And so I maybe will buy more from the name brand because I know from experience this company's been around for 100 years, or this company has something to lose if their peaches are not good. And so therefore I will pay more for that assurance. And so you need to have a brand strong enough so that people will pay more for the assurance that comes from employing you and not an algorithm. And so that's the piece we've got to crack.
Actually, we're going to go on to personal branding. But one thing that struck me from that is this whole idea of likability and being able to get on with people that you're working with or you want to work with. And then it makes me think of Dr. Robert Cialdini. And we're both fanboys, fangirls of Dr. Cialdini and the work he's done with influence. And there's a whole bit about liking. You can't force somebody to like you, but you can figure out commonalities and how you intersect. Maybe you both like musicals or writing musicals, or you both like personal development, you know, whatever it is, you've gone to the same schools. Do you want to quickly touch on that, Dorie?
Yeah, I think you're really hitting on the right thing, Harsha, because at its worst, but probably still accurate manifestation is kind of the idea of the who do you want to have a beer with question. Yes, people used to always talk about this back in more innocent times, 25 years ago, when George W. Bush was elected. It's like, well, who do you want to have a beer with? The fun guy or the technocrat? And they're like, they want to have a beer with George Bush, so they'll vote for him. So on one hand, it could be seen as a tip of like, oh, okay, so expertise matters less than just relations. But it is interesting and it is telling. And I certainly think it can be misused in the sense that, you know, we obviously want to have some degree of expertise in our world. But if people who have the right skills and who have the right motivations are able to understand and to tap into that, then hopefully their message can spread a little bit further. And I like to think as the more positive manifestation of this, I've actually been thinking about this question a lot lately, right? It's like, what are humans good for in the age of AI? And what I have settled on as the perfect metaphor, I believe, Harsha, and perhaps as a Brit, this will resonate with you. The answer is Andrew Ridgeley. And I have also read a great deal about George Michael and about Wham. And Andrew Ridgeley is very interesting to me because this is a guy, I mean, we all know George Michael was immensely talented. Andrew Ridgeley seems, upon reflection, to be immensely talented at being a likable guy. He, like George, tried for some solo, success. Did not happen. Absolutely did not happen. He tried a bunch of other things. He tried to be a race car driver. Like he was just floundering. After Wham, he did not become a good race car driver. It just kind of didn't happen. But Andrew, today, he's incredibly wealthy. He seems happy. He seems successful, even though professionally, he never reached the level of success that he had at Wham. He never reached the level of professional success that George Michael did. But the biggest thing that he had, he didn't seem to have a great deal of musical talent per se, unlike George. But what he had was that he was so likable and so charismatic. He was the person that built an incredible relationship with George, and George wanted to ally himself with him. I mean, the way that they met was that George was the new kid, like the awkward, gangly, pudgy, crazy hair and glasses and whatever, new kid with a funny name. He didn't go by George. He was Yog. He had this Cypriot name. So Andrew took him in, and Andrew was his buddy and was the guy that helped him get a friend group. And so they had this intense loyalty. And then even better, when George and he were in the band, they were in Wham, they were at the height of their success. And this is the mid 80s, right? The early to mid 80s. This is when AIDS was like, oh my God, this horrifying, scary plague years, everybody's going to die. George tells Andrew that he's gay. He confesses this. And a lot of people, you can probably imagine, Andrew is straight. You would be like, oh my God, you're like an albatross around my neck. You're going to crash our dreams of pop stardom being this homosexual. And instead, Andrew was like, that's cool. And he was totally supportive of George. And George was so scared and so like messed up about it. And Andrew was just absolutely great in receiving this news. And as a result of that, they were able to maintain this really wonderful partnership. And eventually George, went off and flapped his little wings and left Wham. But it was really his likability and his emotional intelligence that made Andrew be able to be part of Wham and have that be successful. And, literally to support him for the rest of his life. He's got co-writing credits on all these Wham songs. He's got a co-writing credit on Careless Whisper. And he's set for life. Not because of what he did musically, but because of what he did as a person. And I think that's very telling for the AI age.
No, I absolutely love that, Dorie. And I do think, do not underestimate the power of likability, because you're trying to figure out how you can stand out from your peers, stand out from the crowd. And I think clearly what we're saying is you have to have a base level of technical expertise, of knowledge, and you've got to have done the work. But even then, in order to stand out, it's very difficult. So that likability piece is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So now going on to the personal brand bit, can you maybe explain to our listeners what exactly you view as a personal brand and how can we go about building it?
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing complicated, really. It's just like, what do people think about you?
Yeah.
That's all. Personal brand is a little bit of like a loaded term. And so I prefer to just kind of substitute reputation for it. And I think it kind of clarifies it and makes it feel a little less queasy to some people who might be weirded out by the term.
And in terms of building it up, let's say you're doing good work, but you need to almost get your ideas out there. And I think this idea of creating content, the way I sort of look at it, it's like there are two pieces to it. You've got almost like the content production or the work you're doing, but then there's a marketing element. And I'm not saying marketing in a sort of sleazy sort of way, but how do you get your ideas out there? How do you connect with people? Because I remember the first time I came across you was probably about 10 years ago, when it was actually my first personal development seminar that I went to. And the lady there put a video of you, and I think it was Carol Dweck as well. So obviously you're in good company. And then I thought, oh, Dorie, yeah, she's cool. Check her out on LinkedIn. But the power of creating content, putting it out there, you never know who's going to be watching. But what are your ideas, Dorie, for our listeners out there who are thinking about trying to build up their personal brand and their reputation?
Yeah, this is a piece that I think flummoxes a lot of people, because obviously I think most everybody, if you're working hard, if you're doing good things, I mean, we want to be acknowledged for that, obviously. But the idea of, oh, but you have to sort of do this extra level of like putting it out there rather than just having it be organically noticed.
Yes.
That is the place where it falls down for a lot of people, because they're like, oh, well, I don't have the time for that. I don't have the energy for that. Or, oh, that feels gross. I don't want to be that person. And so for any combination of those reasons, sometimes people don't do it. And, unfortunately, the net result, I mean, sometimes somebody will get lucky, but the net result is that in most cases, if you are not strategic about trying to make people aware of what you're doing, people will probably not be aware of what you're doing. That's, just sort of the law of averages there. And so we have to decide, all right, what's more important? Is the work more important, or is your feelings of discomfort more important? And I think that what can make it okay for people is that oftentimes there is a little bit of a stereotype around it, or kind of a caricature about what is necessary. And people often kind of jump to the worst conclusion. And I think, sometimes they do this almost as like a self-protective mechanism so they can excuse themselves from doing it, where it's like, oh, well, you're telling me I have to go on Instagram, or I have to go on TikTok, and I have to like take selfies in the bathroom. Is that what you're telling me? And the answer is like, no, that's actually not what we're telling you. But maybe you could post on LinkedIn more than once a year. Maybe that. So I think that there's a broad range, and people sometimes, I think, willfully condense it to a black or white thing. And I think that there's a lot more room of acceptable behavior that people can feel that if they do it, they can still be in integrity with who they are as people in terms of getting the ideas out there. I don't know. How do you think about this, Harsha? Is this a thing that you struggled with at any point, or how did you navigate this personally?
Oh, no, totally. I hated social media. I thought it was horrible. Even LinkedIn, I thought it was a pretty gross thing in a way to shout out about your achievements, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, if you can reframe it and say, look, I have some valuable knowledge acquired from my guests, or I have guests who are able to help you in your career. We're not talking about reinventing the wheel here. These people have gone through, from the bottom to the top. I think there's a song in there somewhere, but they've advanced in their career. They've done some amazing things. I'm trying to pass on that knowledge and give value to the audience. So I think I feel less transactional because I think hopefully the value that you're giving and that I'm providing is adding to their lives, to their careers. And that's how I feel better about it. We're trying to get into this symbiotic relationship where we're trying to help each other. And I think life doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. We can both win, and the pie is big enough for everybody. Sometimes people think that the pie isn't, and there has to be one winner, which it doesn't have to be like that.
I think you raised such an important point, which is for most people, the piece that I think can be really helpful is understanding that if you are sharing ideas, if you're quote unquote putting yourself out there, as long as you are doing it in service to others or in service to the ideas, here's a piece of helpful information. Here's a thing I learned that might be helpful to you or whatever it is. Then it's not self-aggrandizing. It's not being read as self-aggrandizing. There's an enormous difference between, hey, it's Harsha in front of this Lambo versus Harsha sharing a career tip that, he learned and that might be cool. So I think we have to learn to distinguish those things, both in terms of, us doing them and knowing that the Lambo pick is not necessary, and also understanding that there's a difference in how the audience receives them. And people are not going to think you're a jerk if you are putting genuinely helpful information out.
And just an announcement for the listeners, I do not have a Lambo, but if they like the work that either Dorie and I are doing, we'd be most happy to accept a Lambo.
That's right. That's right. We'll put Harsha's GoFundMe into the show notes.
Fantastic. So you've got great content. Obviously, you've got the social media piece as to how do you get it out there. You post on LinkedIn, Instagram, or whatever your favorite channel of choice. But how, beyond that, are there any strategies you can think about for ways people can cut through the noise? Because I think that's the hardest thing, that if you are trying to build your credibility, becoming a recognized expert, how do you go beyond that? Simply doing good work, sharing your ideas? Because I think that's the thing that people find very frustrating. They're so close to breaking through, but then they think, oh, it's 2 years or 3 years. It's too long.
Yeah, this is, of course, a really important topic. And it's one that we've talked about a lot over the years as you've been part of the recognized expert community, is the question of, what does it look like? What does it take? How do you break through? And I think that we certainly, in a lot of ways, live in kind of a quick fix world. But it's important to be realistic with people. And you're mentioning the 2 to 3 years for good reason, which is one of the mantras that we talk about in the course, is that there's a lot of different metrics and everybody's journey is different. But broadly speaking, we've had 900 people go through the Recognized Expert program. And what I can say in the most precise way that would be possible for such a thing is that what I have seen is that it typically takes about 2 to 3 years of concerted effort before someone starts to see very much progress at all in becoming a recognized expert. You start to, at 2 or 3 years, you start to see some glimmers of like, this is clicking a little bit, or I'm getting some interesting inbound. And then at about year 5, you start to see a tip where you start to see some real progress. But, for a lot of people starting out, that just feels like, oh, it's, so much. The truth is, of course, time is going to pass anyway. And I like to be very clear upfront about the level of effort that's required. It doesn't mean effort like, oh my God, it's going to be 60 hours a week every week. But it does mean that it needs to be small, consistent effort that you're doing over that period of time. And when you do it, it's impressive. I feel like you can even say it's morally impressive, because I have a lot of respect for people who are willing to work hard over time and advance toward a goal that is an uncertain goal. I mean, obviously we can do everything in our power to try to make it as likely as possible, but you never have a guaranteed outcome. But I have deep respect for the people that are willing to work hard towards something regardless. It's like, in a lot of ways, like somebody who's working hard to be an Olympic athlete or something. You don't know if you're going to make the team. If you make the team, you don't know if you're going to hit the podium, but you are working hard at mastery and you are investing in spite of an uncertain return because you believe it is fundamentally worthwhile to do. And I think that requires a level of character and courage. And it's something that I really deeply respect, the journey of doing that.
Yeah, and actually 2 points that struck me. One, Stand Out is a really interesting read. And for people who are looking to stand out, definitely check out that and Dorie's other books. Oh, she has a copy there. And is there a Stand Out Networking? I think I bought that. Is that right?
Yeah, Stand Out Networking. It's an ebook that I have. I don't have one to flash because it's only electronic, but yes, there is Stand Out Networking as well.
check that one out there. But also this whole idea of the journey. I think you really have to enjoy the journey. And I think the importance of figuring out what your purpose or your values or what is it you want to get out of this. Now, podcasting, there's no money. But what I love about it is that I get to speak to really intelligent people, like yourself, who I feel very stimulated and I feel energized after that conversation. So regardless of how the podcast does, the fact that I can have these conversations, it's contributing to my own personal development. So I think it's figuring out what are those small wins that you're getting in your life. Is it that message you receive from somebody through the internet? Is it getting on a podcast best of list? There are all these small things you can track and say to yourself, look, this is what I'm accumulating, and these are the sort of the wins from what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you referenced Standout earlier. I mean, in fact, in Standout, I tell a story about precisely this, which is that even in the early days, it's kind of, as they say, right? It's, it's harder now than it was earlier because the market's more crowded, blah, blah, blah. But even in the early days of podcasting, it was not easy to amass a show that was like, a popular success, right? I mean, that's always a bit of a challenge. So the secret for this or for any kind of extracurricular content related endeavor is to think, okay, how can I make it worthwhile for me, even if I'm not going to have a Joe Rogan-like audience, right? I mean, obviously, it'd be worthwhile if you had a million people or 5 million people listening every month. Yeah, exactly. But let's assume it's, a small audience. Well, what would still make it nice? And so you've identified, like, it's a win because it becomes a networking vehicle. It's a win because it becomes a professional development vehicle. You are building relationships and deepening relationships, and that's fantastic because it's like, what's the threshold where it's enough just to ... and then anything above that is gravy. And I think that's a nice way to think about it because that's the kind of viewpoint that will keep you motivated to do it. When we're motivated strictly by the external metrics of it's not worth it if I don't get X number of downloads because then I can't monetize on an advertising network or whatever, you're probably going to give up pretty fast. Whereas if you like it for more intrinsic reasons, well, you know what? You might find yourself doing 100 episodes and then you might find yourself doing 250 episodes.
Yeah, and the funny thing about, say, with the podcast story is that I feel that I'm improving as an interviewer. I think my communication skills are getting better, but that's as a result of putting in the work, doing the number of episodes. And funny enough, if, say, a famous person suddenly said, okay, Harsha, tomorrow night, I need an interviewer. Can you come along and interview me? I would say, yeah, sure. It may not be the best, but I'd be able to do it. And one funny story, Dorie, is that a couple of years ago, I was interviewing a reasonably well-known sportsman, doing a Q&A with him. And I'd never met him. I hadn't even emailed him, but I was going through his PA. But because I'd done the research and I felt comfortable interviewing him and I was comfortable with the subject matter, it went quite well. And somebody came up to me afterwards and I said, oh, I didn't know you were such good friends with X. He said, that's the first time I've ever met him.
Oh, that's great.
But
That's
it
so
is
cool.
just funny how you have these small stories and these small wins. There's no money in it, but it's all about the journey and developing yourself. And it's a story to share on a podcast episode.
Yeah, exactly. That's very cool. And you never know what might come from it, whether it's an interpersonal relationship, a friendship, people who will blurb your book if you want to write books. There's interesting examples. I mean, in one of my other books, Entrepreneurial You, I talk about a woman named Fei Wu who had a podcast and built essentially an agency business on the back of it because she would do websites and video editing and different types of things for people because she would build a relationship with them through the podcast and they would kind of get to talking and learn more about what she did. And then they're like, well, Faye, I like you, I trust you. And they would hire her. And so the podcast, bizarrely, because it doesn't seem like a business development strategy exactly, it was not a business development strategy really at scale. It was not about the listeners, although, that would be great.
Yeah,
it was actually
course,
a business development strategy for the people who were on the podcast because they liked her so much. They're like, hey, can you do that for me?
Yeah, and that's a really great point because you are showcasing your guests, but you're also showcasing yourself. So say if I'm going for a job interview, people will naturally Google me and they'll come up with this stuff. And then that starts subliminally creating, hopefully, a positive impression about myself and the work that I do. So you're almost trying to change the odds in your favor so that that person will like you or look upon you favorably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I suppose moving on from that, Dorie, the whole idea of networking, and we've talked about likability, and sometimes people view it in a very transactional way. But how can we do that in a less transactional, more pleasant way? Because I think if you can build those genuine relationships, that is so key. And I like that point you were mentioning in your talks. Like, don't ask too soon. because then it almost undoes all the good work that you have done to create the relationship.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think you're pointing to, which is important. So, just to complete the collection, in my most recent book, The Long Game, I talk about a concept which is no asks for a year. And for me, this is important. I mean, obviously a year is a little bit of an arbitrary deadline. Is it better to be 11 months or 13? But the general thrust, the directionally correct view, as I like to think of it, is that for the first year or certain portion of time that you know someone, the most important thing, it's not that you're like, holding on and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then on day 366, you're hitting them. The key to a great relationship is it's almost like a Buddhist kind of state of mind. You want nothing, you need nothing. If you completely just free your mind of the question of like, well, what can this person do for me? If it just, it's gone. And you're like, you know what? I like this person. So how can I spend more time with them? And how can I be helpful to them? Then it creates a great dynamic, because it's always true, of course, that some people are takers. I think you discovered that before too long. But in most cases, people are not. And people, if you are kind to them, they will want to be kind to you. And so if you genuinely like them and respect them, and over the course of a year, if you're really trying to connect with them and engage with them, you'll get a sense. Eventually, they'll want to do things for you. And you are not doing it for that reason, but that is a thing that will happen. But the key is just, I can't stress this enough, you need to want and need nothing. And when we enter that space, that's when good things can happen.
Yeah, that is so true. That if you're looking for a job or if you're looking for a partner, if you are in the mode of, okay, let's see what happens, I'll try applying for these things, or I'll kiss a certain number of frogs, eventually the right person will come to you. So just don't stress about it too much. And the whole idea of don't expect too much from anybody, just try and have a nice conversation and exchange ideas, because I think you'll quickly get an idea of, is that person on the same wavelength as you? Are there projects that we could work on together? If they do genuinely like you, as you said, they will go out of their way to help you without you even asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the most important human evolutionary skills that, not all of us, to be clear, but almost all of us have evolved to have is a really good ability to read people quickly and to assess motives. And if you are putting out a vibe that you want a thing, that you are playing an angle, most people will be able to pick up on that very rapidly. Like, even if they don't quite know what or whatever, they're going to get a sense of that avaricious vibe that you are sending. And it's going to alarm them. For most sensible people, they'll be like, well, I don't want that. I don't want that in my life. And certainly that is the case for high profile people, because they unfortunately get hit up with so many requests, so many people wanting things. So they're even more attuned to it. But for anybody of any level of status, it's sort of like, okay, if you're the salesman that wants to like sell them something right away, they're going to be like, oh no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to take that call. And so the only way to avoid it is just, we have to cleanse ourselves of it. It's not about, oh, you have a thought in the back of your mind and you can't convey it to the other person. The other person will know. This is what went down over campfires when people were eating meat off the bone. They will know. And so the only way to be able to genuinely build friendships, especially with high status people who are under a lot of pressures and demands, is that you cannot be that person. You have to be a better kind of person and just say, you know what, it's going to take care of itself. And this is not like the secret kind of thing, do this and put a vision board together and magic things will happen. This is just literally saying, I am going to be the person that is only building relationships for the purpose of being around enjoyable people and trying to be a helpful person in the world. And I think that's, generally accepted as a good way to be. And so we need to be that person. And when you are, people like having that kind of person around.
I love that point. And one additional point, I'm an introvert, and I think you're an introvert as well, Dorie, isn't
yeah.
that right? Yeah. So for introverts out there, don't be afraid of reaching out. Don't be afraid of connecting with somebody. Maybe if you're at that drinks reception, look for that person who's not talking to anybody, and actually just go up to them and start chatting with them. And it could be that it's actually a very important person who just doesn't know anybody there, or it could be that they're not, but that's not the point. Just be a decent person and go and start chatting with them, and you never know what happens in life.
Yeah. I mean, I had this experience once. It was very memorable to me. There was a reception that I got invited to years ago. It was a fundraiser for a charity, and my friend was like on the board. And so I got invited to this kind of pre-event, and it was very small. And the guest of honor was Keanu Reeves. And
Hey,
they were
Keanu.
Yeah, there's probably, less than
Love
50
it.
people there. So it's very small. Yeah, I mean, who does it, right? He's awesome. But at this event, like the whole point is like, oh my God, it's a small group. You get to mingle with Keanu Reeves. And no one was mingling with Keanu Reeves because I think they were scared to. They didn't know what to say to him. They didn't want to be like the weird, awkward person. And so he was
Yeah.
just like kind of almost in the corner, like sort of fiddling with his phone. And I think some people read that and they're like, oh, he doesn't want to talk to me. But, I really think it was like Keanu Reeves didn't know anyone. And he was like, what do I do here? It's
Yeah.
very awkward. And so he was looking for someone to talk to him. And so I went up and I started talking to him. And he seemed like actually legitimately appreciative because,
Yeah.
I mean, he's at a fundraiser. Like the whole point is he knows
Yeah.
he's supposed to be talking to people. It's not that he wants to be a jerk. It's that he was, I think, nervous and didn't know who to talk to or what to say. And so I say in air quotes, rescuing him by going up and being like, hey, how's it going? And we were able to have a very nice chat. But just like it's true that a lot of people are afraid to ask out the pretty girl at the bar. And so therefore you have a disproportionately good chance of getting a date with a pretty girl because she's just ignored all the time. Similarly, people were like actually legit scared to talk to Keanu. So I think we need to recognize that and recognize how awkward that is for the person and recognize that it's actually kind of a pro-social thing sometime to go up and say hi.
I'm intrigued. Was that pre-John Wick or post-John Wick?
I wish, right? No, I have the prettiest girl in the world who I married last year, but I met her on a internet Zoom speed dating. But before online dating and whatever, I would go to bars and they still let you smoke in bars. And like I'm asthmatic and I hate smoke so much that I tried to like not go to bars. So my ability to pick up anyone in a bar was severely limited as a
Limited.
result, which, honestly is probably why I didn't get married until I was 45. I'm blaming the bars and the smoke, Arsh. I think that must be the problem.
Very good. We're coming up to the end of our time, Dory, and I just wanted to look at the long game.
Yeah, the long game. The subtitle for this guy is How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And that's really what I was trying to get at, that in sort of the opening anecdote of the book, I talk about what motivated me, which is that for so long, I would talk to people and, you'd sort of ask the general question like, hey, how's it going? What's going on? And again, I would hear some variation from very successful people where they would say, good, but I'm so busy. Or that, be like, oh, it's going great. I just wish I had a moment to think. And it was like this, almost immediately they'd go to like this place where they were expressing how, deranged they were from their lack of ability to have quiet time and peaceful thinking, which, is something that almost everybody says, yes, I want that. Yes, that's good. But nobody was having it. And I was like, wow, these are successful people. In theory, they should be able to have a little bit more agency over their life. Like what's going on? What's going wrong with this picture? And I wanted to understand, why is it that everyone is so frenzied? And clearly there's negative consequences if no one actually has any time to do strategic thinking. So what is going on and how do we solve for that problem? And that was what I was really trying to get at.
Yeah, because I think that's a great point. You need that white space for the magic to happen because creativity doesn't happen by you working at it. Obviously, you've got to put the effort in, but then the ideas almost come to you like magic, like writing a great song or whatever.
Yeah, certainly. That's true. There is a season to everything. And as I talk about in the long game, we need to toggle between both heads up mode and heads down mode. And, heads down mode, of course, is like, okay, execution, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. But heads up mode is equally important, which is where you're sort of looking around. You're like, okay, well, what's the next big idea? Is there a faster way of doing this? Is there a better way of doing things? Has the situation changed? Am I still working on the right thing? And if you don't actually ask yourself that periodically, you're like the scientist who went head down in 1985 and was like, I am going to build the greatest Betamax ever. And, whatever, 50 years later, they're like, I did it. It's the greatest Betamax. And, everyone's like, oh. So you don't want to be that guy. So we need to just make sure that periodically we're doing both things. And it's so easy for humans to get in a rut and to forget to ask questions and to shake it off and change our mode of operation. But we have to remind ourselves forcibly to do that.
Oh, and for our younger listeners, Betamax is a video tape player that was pre-DVDs. It's funny how almost the best thing doesn't always get adapted or adopted. It's the one that you can get out into the market as quickly as possible. But I do like that idea of you've got to execute, you've got to take action, but you've also got to look at the way the world is, and you've got to think, how am I fitting in with that? Because clearly there's no point being a master of something which nobody cares about. And, you know, remember when we were talking about your first book, how you produced a lot of content and you had these other ideas which you thought were great, but you came from a blog post and then an HBR article, and that was what the market wanted. And that was the start of this very stellar journey.
Yeah, precisely.
Brilliant. So, Dorie, we're coming up to the end of our time. So, before we wrap up, can you share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you, how they can get hold of your books, and any other things you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, thank you so much, Harsha. It's always such a treat to get to talk with you. If folks are interested in diving into my work, the most recent book, which is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the other places, I guess Waterstones, if you're in the UK, would be The Long Game. And I have more than 700 articles that I've written available as, links on my website at dorieclark.com. And one of the things that I'm proudest of and put actually a disproportionate share of emphasis on is my newsletter, where I write essentially article style missives once or twice a week that Forbes has declared one of the better newsletters, one of the best newsletters out there. And if folks would like to get it, they can go to dorieclark.com/subscribe.
And also you've got your recognized expert community, which I'm a member of. So if people are interested in that, just check out your website.
Yes, it's up on the website, and people can even go get a direct link there at dorieclark.com/rex, REX, to learn about recognized expert.
Fantastic. And Dorie, one last thing. Is there anybody, just a couple of people you'd like to give a quick shout out to who's helped you in your life or your career?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, somebody who I think always deserves a lot of credit. It's always something that I respect when someone wants to build a community and to be thoughtful and generous about it, because all the incentives are for exclusivity and for status. Yeah. And I think that a few years ago, the executive coach Marshall Goldsmith really tried to put together a community of folks where he was wanting to kind of pass on his knowledge and bring people together. And he did it in a very generous way, no cost, and he was footing the bill for things. And I really respect the ethos behind that. And in fact, I write about Marshall in The Long Game because we have a section, sort of talking about how you have to keep disrupting yourself and trying new things, that there's like waves in your life. And I use Marshall to raise one of the points, which is that in kind of, I'll say what's for some people is kind of a final stage, it's the reaping stage where you've, built up your career and your momentum and your money and whatever. And a lot of people just coast once they have that. And it's like, oh, good, I solved the puzzle, I figured it out. But you do get stale if that's your only thing and you're the horse that you came in on 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And eventually it does get a little old. And if you want to avoid either having that go off a cliff or you want to avoid basically becoming lame, you need to forcibly reinvent and go back into a learning phase to try something different and to learn something different and try something new. And Marshall is somebody who really has been doing that in a lot of ways that I respect. So I appreciate what he's done and I appreciate the character that he's brought to it.
Oh, I love that. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Alexis and also your mum. We're Facebook friends, but she's still never messaged me.
Well, thank you, Harsha. I appreciate it. Yes, my mom has been quite ill recently, but she's plugging away and she's working hard and getting better. And my wife, Alexis, has been amazing at helping me as we're trying to nurse my mom back to health. So thank you for that great shout out.
No problem. And one final very, very silly thing. Have you come across this TV program called Hack? I absolutely love it.
Oh, Alexis has started watching it, but I haven't yet, probably because Alexis has watched it and then now I'm behind. So I've got to figure out some time on a plane or something where I can get into it. But I've heard good things, so I'm glad to get your recommendation too.
It's amazing. But one interesting thing is that it's about this female comedian who's, I think in her 70s, but she's going through this process of reinvention where her act is not as funny as it was. And then she gets a younger comedy writer to help her come up with material. And it's that whole idea of at whatever stage in your life, if you are challenging yourself, okay, it's not a linear path to success, but if you're always challenging yourself and trying to get better at any stage in our lives, we can do that. So yeah, do check it out. It is hilarious. And there's a very funny clip, which I'll send you, which I think you'll like.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Harsha.
Brilliant. Dorie, it has been such a pleasure. Looking forward to catching up with you in November when we meet for the Thinkers 50 and the dinner that we're organizing. But yeah, have a great rest of the day. And thank you so much, Dorie, for the time and your inspiration with the work that you do.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.